Welcome to How to Trust Your Intuition, the podcast, the place where we learn that trust is earned and not given, even with ourselves. I'm your host, Betsy LeFae. I'm a social worker, turned award-winning psychic medium, turned intuition teacher. And my school, Trust Yourself Intuition School, celebrated its 10th anniversary in 2023. Join us each episode as we interview thought leaders and luminaries in every genre. They talk about how and when they learn to trust their intuition. Most say they're still learning. What happens when they do trust it and what happens when they don't. Stick around as we all walk together down the road towards trusting our intuition. Welcome back to another episode of How to Trust Your Intuition. It's with pleasure that we have Chelsea Riffe on the show today. Chelsea Riffe is a podcast host, podcast strategist, and entrepreneur, serial traveler currently in South Africa, and passionate reflector. I don't know about you, but I personally have had a lot of false starts in years past with podcasts. I've had a lot of acquaintances, friends say, I want to start a podcast. Sometimes people think when they think about starting a podcast, they want to sound just like an NPR show with tons of budget, and they have no idea how or where to start. So I found our conversation today to be really helpful because Chelsea also wants you to live your life telling as many stories as you can, no matter how big or how small. I just binge listened to my So Pod Life, the podcast that I guess was recorded in like 2019 or something like that. No advertising, no budget, just two people talking about the episodes to unknown people. I'm thinking, I guess I didn't look into it that much. So, whether it is you want to preserve your family history, because you never know how long that archive will live for. It can live on and on. Or you want to preserve a recipe, or maybe just a conversation with a friend, it might be a good idea to turn it into a podcast format. So Chelsea was an energetic guest. She is a world traveler, and we talk about that in combination with trusting our intuition. Enjoy the show. All right. Well, welcome to the show, Chelsea. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. Could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So I am a podcast host. I host the podcast In My Non-Expert Opinion. I'm also a podcast coach and strategist. So I help people launch, grow, and monetize podcasts. And I'm a digital nomad. So I travel full time. And I'm currently, as we're recording, in Lima, Peru.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I really had no idea where you'd be calling in from today. A thought just came to mind that you are the person to ask this about. So way back when, before podcasts were a big thing, right? And then they started coming online. I know a lot of people who are like, I want a podcast just like Radiolab or This American Life. And not really realizing that they have a huge budget and a huge staff and professionals who has been doing this for decades and just huge. And they've been doing radio for decades. But I also, this is a complete assumption, but I also kind of assume that, because having done it, that podcasting can be as easy, not like the most most polished, but can be as easy as, taping this Zoom conversation and then directly uploading it, right?
Yeah.
So what if somebody comes to you and they're like, I have this business and I want to start a podcast and I want to sound like Radiolab? What do you do in that case?
I usually ask them, what's their bandwidth? What's their energy? What resources do they have? And then let's work backwards from there. So, a mom of 3 that works full time with a dog in the house and a busy schedule is going to have a lot different of a podcast than a single woman who doesn't really have that many responsibilities and works part-time, right? So when we're comparing ourselves to, Radiolab or any of these massive networks, we have to remember they're media companies. Like you said, they have millions, if not billions of dollars in backing. And if you listen to the end of this podcast, they'll usually be like, this show is produced by blah, 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 blah. And there's like 20 people on the show. So,
Yeah.
a lot of us, we can outsource and we can have editors and producers, of course, but I think when you're starting out, it's just important to consider where you're at and try to keep it as simple and basic as possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I didn't really think I was going to ask this, but what do you think of the format of this show? It's pretty simple, huh?
I love simple. I love, love,
Yeah.
love simple. Like to me, simple is easy to digest. It's easy to follow. People know what they're getting and people appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd love to hear about you learning to trust your intuition. And with any of these questions, if you have anything that you want to weave in or mention, especially about being a digital nomad who travels basically full time, yeah.
Hmm.
Um, just because I think that's going to be really interesting to our people. I could take my job anywhere, but I don't want to be a digital. I don't want to take it everywhere. It's just not.
Hmm.
It's not for me. But I know when traveling, intuition has to be a skill. I mean, you're a world, like literally worldly traveler. So like you really do need to trust your intuition. So no pressure to have travel stories and the answers, but I'd welcome that. So I'd love to know about you, when, how, or if you're still learning about trusting your intuition.
I would say learning to trust my intuition definitely started probably in college, just being in a sorority and going out and going home and walking around. Like you have to be aware of your surroundings and people's intentions. And like you just start to pick up on, I think, bodily cues. And
Mm,
I learned that my intuition usually sits in like my stomach and sometimes in like my heart chakra area. And so I'm like, okay, something's like a little unbalanced there, or like buzzing, or even sometimes cramping or something like that. I'm like, my body is telling me something, and I think our body's wisdom holds all the gold. So
mhm,
yeah, I would say it started probably around then. And then to your point with traveling, I studied abroad during college. I went to Valencia, Spain for 3 months, and whole new world, new currency, new language, new culture, everything. And same thing, you have to develop what people now call like street smarts.
yeah,
And street smarts is kind of another term for intuition.
that's right.
So, you don't turn certain corners, and like you have to be cognizant of like, why is this person behind us and why have they been behind us? And do we really want to get in that taxi? And you just start to learn to trust it because you hear people's stories of like, I didn't listen and I got robbed. Actually, we were just talking about this last night about how two girls felt like they were really young and had intuition, but they were so young. They're like, I like no one's gonna listen to me. I'm 4 and 5 years old. And both in those instances, they got their parents or their grandparent got robbed. And
Mm,
so it was like, wow, we have intuition since we're like babies and we're so young, but I don't think we fully trusted or developed it until later. But
mhm.
yeah, I would say through my travels, it's only gotten stronger.
I bet. I bet. I love the words that you use. You said crampy, and there was another one that you used that I can't remember, but the really great
Buzzy.
buzzy. That's what yeah, buzzy or crampy. Would you say for you, buzzy is more of a don't go down that path or a go down that path feeling for you?
Buzzy is usually, yeah, I would say it's like don't go down that path. It's like danger.
Mm-hmm.
And the crampy one. The crampy one is
I
like
would hope so.
red alert, danger. Yeah, that's the one that I'm like, oh no. And you know what's interesting is I had to do some of my own research of like what is the difference between intuition and anxiety.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes I still am like, maybe that's not my intuition. Like maybe that is anxiety, but anxiety is trying to keep me safe. So in a way, you could call it a little bit of intuition too.
Well, okay. Well, can I help break this down a little bit?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Obviously, it's my favorite topic. Well, first of all, I mean, this is something that most everybody, myself included, gets confused about. In complete generalization, but empaths, sensitive people, anxiety, gaslighting those children, right? Like that's a big whole thing. But as you mentioned, intuition lives in the body, which is totally right on. And obviously, part of our body is the nervous system. And so, one of the systems that our intuition speaks through is our nervous system, right? So that buzzing or cramping that you get, that somebody could interpret that as anxiety, right? So the way it's really interesting, I'll share this story. I thought in modern day language, I was being paranoid. This is great with the travel story, like who's behind us? Every Sunday, my anxiety would spike and I would be like protective of this house that I'm in and like not want to leave. And I had this like weird thought that someone was spying on me, which is in general like a movie. It's like usually not reality. And this has been going on for weeks. And I was in therapy and I was like, I just want to mention this to you because, like, this past Sunday, I relaxed a little bit more. I didn't bring it up because there was so many other things we were talking about, but I just wanted to let you know. And my therapist is like, okay. That was on a Monday. And then Tuesday, I get in my email inbox an email with pictures from the spy that I had zero evidence for.
What? That
Yeah.
is so crazy.
Yeah, and obviously it's a terrible situation, but also it's a really good lesson for me, another lesson of like, Betsy, you weren't paranoid. Like you were anxious for a reason. Like intuition can say like this situation makes me crampy or anxious, right? So then when we're having like a trigger or something, usually we can trace it if we have that time to like slow down. And the only really way to parse it is to ground yourself and to, soothe your nervous system because your intuition feeling won't change. It won't go away. Yeah. And over time, it does get a lot more easy to parse out. It's always subtle. It's just always subtle. So that's why we develop the skills,
Exactly.
it's why we get more fluent in it.
You're all ready for your vacation. It's really hectic getting here, but you're seated in your airplane seat, looking out the window, and you hear the pilot come on the intercom. Good day, everyone. It's a beautiful day outside, 71 and sunny. As you're aware, to get to where we're going, we need to fly over that mountain range, and sometimes there can be a little bit of turbulence. I'm about 80% sure we'll get there safely. So buckle up, relax, and enjoy your flight. I know that sounds like an absurd situation, but when I put this in context of trusting yourself and trusting your intuition, and I ask people on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most, how much do you trust yourself? 8 is a very high score when asking people. So if you fall on a 2 to 4 range, you're totally not alone. Now picture this other scenario. You're out to lunch with a friend, and the friend says that they've been having a really difficult time learning French. You ask the logical question, are you taking a class? And their answer is, well, I'm taking Spanish. Guess what? If you want to trust yourself deeply, if you want to have an easier time making decisions, break through blocks, connect with people, know who to connect with when, there's a class for that. I've actually helped thousands of people truly trust themselves in uncertainty, in times of doubt or fear, shame or guilt. And I have a free masterclass called Intuition 101, How to Trust Yourself in Uncertain Times, that will tell you everything you need to know in order to learn to trust yourself. The link is in the show notes. However, you can also go to howtotrustyourintuition.com, all spelled out.
So I'd love to hear about a time when you trusted let's say when you didn't trust your intuition and what happened as a result.
Oh, in a relationship. I remember feeling like probably when I was maybe 25 or 26, I met this guy and I remember my intuition being like, I don't actually think this one's for you. Like, there's a lot of signs going not well here. Like, everything in my body, going back to body wisdom, was just screaming, like, no, no, no. But he was showing so much interest and he was really persistent and, kept trying to reach out and make things happen. And I think I was just really at a point in my life where I like didn't have the highest self-esteem either. And so I was like, oh, well, maybe this is the guy for me. Like, look how much effort he's putting in and look all the things he's doing, and try to convince myself otherwise. And I think that not trusting my intuition got me in that relationship for months and months, way longer than I should have. I should have stayed in that relationship for not even 2 weeks, and I stayed for like almost a year. So that caused a lot of emotional damage. I had to go to like so much therapy after that and do so many things to like heal myself. So yeah, I would say that's an example where I like betrayed my intuition, and it definitely was right from the beginning.
That's the most common one where it's difficult to share. It's interesting too, because as we talked about, it's in the body, and it could come through any part of your body or any part of your consciousness. So you're like, well, sometimes it lives in my belly, sometimes it lives in my heart, right? And so people are like, follow your heart or follow your gut. Well, they're actually two different entities.
Right.
Don't always agree. So it's very, very interesting. There is a back and forth there. But yeah, I mean, obviously you're not the only one who shared a story about that. I appreciate that transparency. Yeah. How about a time when you did trust your intuition, most likely despite logic, or if people were not supporting it?
Probably when I started my podcast or my business. I remember both of them being like, you don't have any evidence that this is going to work. More so for my business. I don't have a business background. I didn't go to any type of entrepreneurial school or training. I didn't go to business school. There were so many like factual pieces of evidence to show me like why this wouldn't work. But my intuition, this one felt brighter. Like this felt more like a lightning bolt of like creativity and inspiration and like, yeah, brightness. And I was just like, you know what? I just trust that this is going to work out, and my intuition tells me so. Like, I cannot even see this failing. Like, when people would ask me, what's your plan B or what's your backup plan? It was like, what are you talking about? Like, there was just not even a thought about that. You could sometimes call that delusion, but I was like, no, to me, that is my intuition speaking very strongly to me of like, trust that you have the steps and the wisdom to figure this out. You're resourceful and capable, so you will figure this out. And I wouldn't have followed it that strongly if I felt otherwise. Like I remember when I had the idea, I got the website and put up a calendar link to schedule with me, and started creating a Facebook group. I just went fully in. And to me, that's when my intuition did not lead me astray. Instead, it led me to everything actually working out very much in my favor. And I think that what we're talking about, the body wisdom, there was a very big difference in how that felt versus some of the other ones.
That's amazing. You used the word delusional, which totally stood out to me. Can we just like talk about that for a second? So you're like, well, you may see that as like delusional. So like, this is obvious, but I think it's worth talking about. Like, do you think
100%.
that's something that people really fear and like stops them from trusting their intuition? Is the fear that people will see them as crazy or delusional, or yeah.
100%. I actually did a podcast called like "Be Delusional in Pursuit of Your Dreams" because I was like, you are gonna sound crazy to people. Like I started using examples of like Freddie Mercury and Queen. I mean, think of some of the songs they sang, and they were wild at the time. And there's even a movie about how record labels were like, we can't put this out in the world. And his intuition was like, we're gonna do it. So you could look at him and be like, he's delusional. Like, what was he thinking, putting out songs like that at that time? And like, there's a 7-minute Bohemian Rhapsody with all these different crazy like choruses. There's so many weird parts of that song, but it ended up being one of the most classics in the world. And again, I think it's because he probably did have a little bit of delusion and intuition that it served him in the best right. So I think when we are scared of being delusional, be like a lot of people that made it big probably seemed delusional at first. And then later people are like, oh, how did you do it?
Yep. Well, everything new is crazy.
Exactly.
So it's normal.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not to really compare ourselves to Freddie Mercury, of course, but the similar thing that I saw in your story and what you were sharing with his, and I've seen the movie, it's great. is the tenacity and the persistence. So you're like, my idea came as a lightning bolt, and then you listed like basically 500 things that you just like churned out.
Mhm.
Like there wasn't people asking you for it. There was no like huge demand. No one was like, I'm going to pay you to make a Facebook group. You're like, I'm starting from scratch. And we
Mhm.
know that with Freddie Mercury as well. I mean, every record label was like, no, 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 you're crazy. And he just like kept going. And so I want to know about when, I think this would be a really good sort of full circle. You help people launch their podcast, make it great, all of these things. We have that newbie, maybe they don't come in saying, I want This American Life, but they're like, I want to start a podcast. And do you ever see, and if so, can we talk about it, someone who comes in with, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with podcasts, but we'll take it in this avenue, someone who sort of comes in with sort of like a Cinderella sort of story of like, well, I want to make a podcast, but I want it to be an Oprah's network. I don't even know if she has a podcast network, but like,
Right.
or I want to make a first season of a podcast, and then I want NPR to pick it up.
Right.
Otherwise, like, I'm not going to do the podcast. Like, do you get people like that?
I actually have not gotten
I figured
people
because
like that.
you're not a match of that energetically, like, and neither am I.
Yeah, I haven't. I will say there are people that reach out to me that ask my opinion on joining podcast networks, and they'll start saying like, I think I'm going to pitch myself to this network. And I have a lot of background in like advertising and all that stuff. So I try to like point out the pros and cons of it. And I'm like, I don't think it's all you think it is. And like, I don't know if you've actually thought through the magnitude of that network and like what they're expecting of someone of that stature. So I have gotten like inquiries, but I haven't actually attracted anyone that was like, yeah, I need
It's a similar boat. I will say, like, I have very few pet peeves in life, but one of them is it's just not my vibe. But anyone who is either an entrepreneur or attempting to or wants to be, and they're just like, you know what, like, I really like podcasts, so I just want someone to pay me to do my podcast. And it's like, then you're not going to do a podcast then. Like, why
Right.
even think about it? It's like, well, I want to
Yeah.
drive, but I want someone to pay me to drive to the grocery store. Otherwise, I'm not going to the grocery store. And it's like,
Right.
Okay, well, we're just not at the cut from the same cloth then.
Yeah, there's a lot of people too. There are some people I attract that, and I think it's, again, it's going back to what you were talking about earlier, like looking at these media companies and how they do it, where people are like, oh, I just want to show up and record and do nothing else. And I'm like, but you're the creative director. Like, you know what you said in the podcast. So it should be part of your responsibility to be able to say, like, minute 20, or at least in the middle of the episode, we said something really great. Can you make sure to highlight that? Or, you know what, here's at least 3 topics we covered. And I find that there's a lot of people, yeah, that are like, oh, I just want to show up and like someone else can do all that for me. But then when someone else does it for them, they're like, well, I'm not happy with the clip they chose, and I don't like that video, and I don't know why they would pull this. And I'm like, well, because you offloaded all the creative responsibility, and that's what happens.
Well, this is where a really good marriage happens. So when you're in the flow and you trust your intuition, you can just flow through those. Like, editing for me, like, it just happens. Like, I'm the one responsible for it. I'm the one that pulls the clips, but I also am the one who can sit there and be like, what clip do I use? Holy cow, the whole episode was good. I just get overwhelmed and overwhelmed and overwhelmed. And then all of a sudden, my mouse will be like, click, and I'll press play and be like, that was a really good minute.
Yes.
There we go. Like, decision made. And it is one of those things like it can just click into place, I guess, if it's in alignment.
When I graduated with a BA in psychology in 2002, attachment work was only applied to children. Now, in 2023, it seems to be all the rage for a reason, because knowing your attachment type, there are 3 main types: avoidant, anxious, and secure, really changes your life. And if you listen to the podcast where I talked about how I lost $100,000 from a spiritual, quote unquote, spiritual coach, the silver lining to that experience was me discovering the root of a lot of my issues. I was anxiously attached. I had anxious attachment. At the very end of that terrible, terrible situation, yes, it was traumatic, I came across Maya Diamond's work. And it was working through her program that literally rewired my brain from anxious to secure. This is how I made it through all of my major transitions over the past 2 years and discovered so much about myself. Now, if you don't know about attachment work, don't feel bad. Here's a typical situation, in fact, the most common situation that happens with these attachment styles. Person A and person B are in a relationship. They care about one another. Person A reaches out to person B, doesn't hear back right away. So then maybe sends another text or another gesture, which further pushes person B away. Both people get resentful, and eventually they might break up. I was in that situation more often than I'd like to remember. I married the wrong person, I had toxic family relationships, and had no idea until I took Maya's program. So, the link for a free consultation is in the show notes, and I'm so happy to offer it all the podcast listeners. If you sign up for her program, you will get a free session worth $500 with Maya Diamond herself, one-on-one. That's just for How to Trust Your Intuition podcast listeners.
And yeah, one more sort of question about this topic, intuition, sharing your voice, podcasts and stuff. So we talked about how you like the simple sort of format for podcasts and things like that. I want to know, there's way more different categories in podcasts than this, but I'm just making it super simple. You know, somebody who wants to make a podcast just to promote their business, right? So they're a business strategist. So each episode they give a little nugget of business strategy, you know,
Right.
or they talk to whatever. But then you have the other people, more of the like storytellers, and they're like, I want to get my voice out. Right. What, I mean, it's a very general question, but like we can even use an example. I don't even know of an example, but like what kind of, I just know that you're a big supporter of sharing your voice. And I think that podcast is a great medium for that, to have long format talk. Don't take things out of context. You can really get to the nitty gritty. So when somebody says like, I want to share my voice in a podcast, what, even what does that bring up for you? Because it must be a joy.
Yeah, as soon as people say they want to share their voice, I'm like, woo, another person like activated in this space. I love hearing that. And yeah, to your point, there's a lot of different reasons or ways you could start one. I think people only think it has to drive a business, or I can't talk about anything else, when I'm like, there's podcasts that are pure entertainment that just exist for fun, that are creative hobbies. A big one that I have an example of is Watch What Crappens. They're a show that they just recap watch what like crappens on Bravo. So they're excuse me, Watch What Happens. And so they just literally recap the housewives and Vanderpump Rules, and they'll just break
I
down
love
the
how
show.
it's a recap of a recap. That's awesome.
Yes, exactly. And I'm like, and it's a big show, and like that doesn't have anything to do with the business, right? That had nothing
To
do
your
with
point,
anything.
I'm listening to, it was recorded in 2019, but I just stumbled upon it, My So Pod Life. And so it's these two ladies, and they're going over the episodes of My So Called Life and just making commentary. And I am hooked. And there's no advertisement. You know, they have a Instagram and Facebook page and email, so you can interact. And like, that's it. You know, you
100%.
really fully know what they do for a living. Like, it comes out a little bit, but exactly to your point. So go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, there's podcasts that exist, yeah, for like you just said, entertainment, fun, education. And then on the flip side of that, some people just want to use it to help expand their business or give their business a voice. And there's a way to do that too, that doesn't have to be so formal and boring. There's a way to just bring your values and your business to life through podcasting. So I do work with both types of people, and it's truly my favorite thing to do.
Yay. I'm so glad you found that. I mean, honestly, that was what attracted me to invite you on the show, is because it was just so apparent from everything I saw. It was just like, I'm here to help you share your voice. And I'm like, oh, yes, you are, girl. Like, let's do this. Well, we might as well just share with the viewers any tips of like maybe they're sitting on the fence, or maybe they're just about to start. Just what would you say for like anyone in that boat?
Okay, I'll give like a spiritual kind of energetic tip and then like a
Oh, I
tactical
like this.
one.
Yes.
Like spiritually or energetic is, especially if you're a woman, or woman identifying, like back in the day in colonial times, they used to literally take women's tongues and like clip them and put them in the town square and like nearly drown them for talking too much.
Wow.
So whenever I feel like, oh, my voice doesn't matter, or I have nothing to say, or like I'm talking too much, I have to think of like, I have the freedom to talk too much. I can talk about whatever I want. We live in an era where we're not going to get punished in the town square. So if anything, it's like, do it for your ancestors, do it for all the women that couldn't do it, or all the people, right? Even a marginalized group or an oppressed group is like, you could be the spokesperson for those people that don't have the platform. So that's when I get really fired up about it from an energetic standpoint, is like, I'm helping bring a voice to something that people might not have access to.
It's huge.
The second part of that is, you have to remember your stories matter. I think due to internet culture and Instagram culture, we have this tendency to think like, oh, I don't have 100,000 followers, or I didn't go viral on TikTok, so who's going to listen to my podcast? And that's a very false and misleading guideline to follow, because it's like, just because someone has 100,000 followers on TikTok doesn't mean they're going to have a great podcast.
Yep.
And a great podcast is subjective, right? There are probably people that don't listen to my podcast and don't think it's great. There's probably people that think it's the best podcast ever. Like, I can't control that narrative. So from the going back to the storytelling piece, it's like, your story is going to resonate with someone, and they're going to be like, thank God it's not a celebrity sharing it. Finally, someone that's more in my shoes that I can relate to.
Yep.
That's like the energetic one. Tactically, if they're like, oh, I'm on the fence and I don't know, it's like tech or something else. Truly, when I started, I used the voice memo app on my phone. I recorded in a closet, and then I just sent myself the file to my email and uploaded that to the editing software.
My phone has great audio quality. I recorded like the outro on my phone, and it's amazing.
People literally used to message me and be like, what studio do you record in? I'm like, in my closet. That's where I'm recording. So yeah, when I think people get really caught up in the tech, and they start, again, going to your point, seeing these microphones and headphones that like NPR uses, or these massive media networks, I'm like, y'all, you really just need the most simple equipment to capture audio, edit it, and publish it, and you are on your way.
I am so glad you said that. Really, really glad you said that. There was something I wanted to circle back to. Oh yeah. So I like, most of the time I don't get into the thought of like, my voice and my message and my experience and my story doesn't matter. I don't really get in. I mean, there have been times, I'm sure, but what I will say is that like, every good psychic needs a psychic. And so occasionally, like in my professional readings for people, I don't use any instruments or cards or anything, but every week I'll pull cards for myself. And just over and over, especially in the past couple of weeks, the messages have been coming through of like, your story matters. Like they'll, like literally say that, like, your voice needs to be heard. Your perspective needs to be heard. And it's just super, super nice because, wouldn't you like someone to catch you before you fall, right? So it's like, I'm like, okay, yeah, cool. Like that's a great boost. And I do very much agree. I think also what you were saying, like do it for your ancestors and everything. Like I see this as just like a time where we can like record. I mean, we're recording history. Like this is a part of history.
Right.
Yeah. And like who knows who will listen to that in the future?
Right? It's a library. It's
Yeah.
like an evergreen library of content.
Exactly. You never know who it will help in the future. Well, this has been super amazing getting to know you. What if podcasts, or if listeners wanted to work with you, we want to know where they can find you, but also what would they come to you for specifically, so that people are super clear?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you want to launch your podcast, grow it, or expand it and potentially monetize, and I'm talking about monetizing through your business, That's what I help people do. So tying your podcast back to your business offers, that's like my specialty. While I know how to do brand deals and I can lock in sponsors, it's just not something that I like helping people with, because I would rather help people grow their own business, not someone else's. So that's usually what I help people with. And they can find me directly at chelseariffe.com or at chelseariffe on Instagram. I have courses, I have trainings, I have one-on-one coaching. So whatever container feels best for you, I invite you to come check it out.
That's super, super clear. Well, I hope anyone who's interested in podcasting gives Chelsea at least a look up, and check out her resources. They're all amazing. Your energy has been amazing today. Thank you so much for showing up, and let this just be the beginning between us.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
How to Trust Your Intuition, the podcast, is written, produced, and created by me, your host, Betsy LeFae. Music provided by Ben Talmy. If you don't want to be like that pilot that is 80% sure you'll get to your next destination safely, and you want to take the right class to learn the right language, and guess what? Intuition is a language. Head over to howtotrustyourintuition.com. I hope this podcast has been helpful to you. If it has, please forward it to a friend who you think it could also make a difference for. There's something that you can do for me and everyone else who listens to this podcast as well. If you hit subscribe, you'll never miss another episode. It'll also help the show get to other people. And of course, I know you've heard other podcast hosts say this before, but it's totally true. If you leave us a 5-star rating and a review, it helps other people like you discover this podcast. We all need to learn to trust our intuition. So, hit subscribe, give us a 5-star review, and write a little blurb while you're there. Your intuition will thank you.